If I can be honest for a second, Windblade is a character that I have never had any kind of connection with. Never watched R&D 2015, never watched Cyberverse, remember basically nothing of the Prime Wars trilogy, and I've never taken the opportunity to read through IDW's first universe, which I probably should, all things considered. But aside from an admittedly cool design and a basic understanding of she talks to the big boys, I don't really know the character, therefore I skipped on her Legacy United toy, but Kian didn't, until he realised that he also didn't know the character and it didn't really have a place in his collection, so he moved her on to me. And I gotta say, I quite liked her. The red was striking, the basics of the mold were fun, but I felt there were some changes that could have been made. So when a repaint of the figure in colours I admittedly prefer went up for sale, I pre-ordered it. So now that I have them both in hand, how do Legacy United, Cyberverse Universe, Windblade and Slipstream fare? Well, yeah, not terribly. Yeah, there are definitely some issues here, but at first glance, the sculpt detail and proportions on these two are great. It's not groundbreaking, I do have some little issues, but it's really nice overall. There's a lot of really interesting sculpted detail on the body. This figure seems to more go for the shapes than it does the surface detail, although there is a lot of surface detailing here. Wouldn't mind seeing a Prime Starscream out of this mold actually. One of the most striking features of this mold are the massive bell-bottom shins. They're really caked in detail, and the way that the kibble is placed on the ankles really helps puff them out. I like those little kind of orb details on the knees as well. The thighs are not so much a feature as they are just a necessity, so they're a lot smaller and they don't have quite as much detail, but I do like the way that they taper. Their hips are pretty wide and simple, and the torso has some really interesting kind of layered detail. It's also cool to see how the same sculpted detail's been repurposed across the Seeker chest and the Windblade chest. Windblade's chest has this block of gunmetal kind of fading some of the details into the background while the red and the blue really shine, and that allows multi-purpose tooling like the Seeker cockpit to really shine when it's picked out on Slipstream. I really like that. The arms are pretty standard, overly thin fembot arms, but with some really cool shoulder pads and these little fins on the wrists. The wings I do find to be a little overly skeletal from the front view, although from the back they're fine. It is ignorable, more so on Windblade I think than Slipstream, because the brighter colours catch the light better, but it's still not the best thing in the world. And then the heads. Now, I don't think it's a hot take that I'm not a massive fan of Windblade's head. The detailing is pretty good, all the sculpting is sharp, but there's something really uncanny about the face. I don't know if it's those pronounced jowls, or the way that the chin sits, or the size of the eyes, but something's just really not right about it. Once again, it's not a bad quality sculpt, I just don't think it's a very good looking one. Whereas Slipstream's, I think this is probably one of my favourite redesigned Seeker heads. The large helmet and smaller face does help her look a lot more feminine. Face sculpt is really nice and crisp, although the mouth could be a little bit clearer. And the actual design of the helmet I absolutely adore. The vents look perfect to me, I love that little jewel in the forehead. Those little antennae are kind of cute in a way. But unfortunately, I don't really think that the sculpting on it matches this body perfectly. I think just about everyone wanted a new mold for Slipstream, and I personally wouldn't have terribly minded maybe a heavy retool of a Siege Seeker with this exact head on it, but I don't hate this. I still think it looks good, I just don't think it's quite seamless. There's a jump from a mix of very curved and angular body proportions, and then a very blocky kind of G1-like head. It actually kind of reminds me of some of the designs from the High Moon games. But that issue with head synergy aside, I do have one issue with this mold. There's a pretty chunky backpack. Now, I don't hate this. It doesn't weigh down the figures too much, but it does a little bit, unfortunately. I've kind of alluded to it before that I don't mind big backpacks unless they are visible from the front or they inhibit the stability of the figures, and this one kinda does. More so on Slipstream than Windblade, I find. That's a little weird. But you know, it's not hateful. The view is blocked from the side by the wings, and personally, I can ignore it pretty easily. Now, one thing I do particularly like here is how differently the figures approach their colour placement. For one thing, the contrast between reds, blacks, and Allspark blue on Windblade looks absolutely fantastic, and the way that it's placed, very, very her. It's a very modern style of design where it's mostly red and then some of the limbs are broken up with little bits of black popping in there. I've already mentioned the gunmetal on the waist, which is also present on the rotors on the wings. That's pretty nice. And I love the Allspark blue trim that you see on the chest, the wrist, the knees. It makes her look kind of regal and I love it. Also have to mention the gold on the crown, that's a really nice pop. This colour scheme really works on this mold, it slims it down a bunch, and it makes it seem really dynamic, and from what I understand it really seems to suit the character, but I gotta admit, Slipstream wins the colours for me. This takes cues of the classic Seeker very well. You've got the secondary colour shins, and they just look absolutely fantastic in this metallic teal. The washed out silver that you find on the thighs and the waist look really nice. The couple of different purples that you find on the chest and the cockpit picked out in blue are pretty nice. That paint scuff's annoying though. What the hell, man? And then the rest of the standard purple and the really dark near black, they just pop really well. I love the little bits of lilac breaking it up, little accents like the black and silver on the shins, the red on the head, pops of blue on the tips of the wings. It's all working a lot better for me than Windblade did. Not that that colour scheme was bad, but this one just hits different. And overall, while I do think that Windblade looks a little bit more cohesive in this mode, I do prefer the way that Slipstream looks. Now, accessories wise, Windblade only comes with the one, and it's pretty cool. I know that people were divided on the way that this sword looks. Kind of weird. I think it's supposed to look like an energy blade of some sort, and I do find that it kind of works for that thanks to the transparent plastic. I like the general shape of the hilt, the way that it's picked out in the paint. It fits into her hand pretty nicely, and you've got these little ports so you can plug it onto her waist, which is really, really cool. I wish more sword-wielding characters could do that. And despite being clear plastic, I do find that this feels fairly durable. I'm not really scared of this thing snapping. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about Slipstream's null rays. These do shit me up a little bit. The actual detail on them is pretty nice. It's a very standard classic null ray, just a little bit smaller. There are hollow spaces to conserve on some plastic, and that would be all well and good apart from the fact that these things are also cast in clear plastic and painted over in completely black, and they feel a lot more thin and fragile than Windblade's sword. Now, you can put them in the hands if you want to, but I personally don't like the way that that looks. I wish there was a port on the shoulder which you could get to in robot mode to plug the null rays on there, but for now, I think your best bet is undermounting them under the arms. That's my personal preference at least. Like I say, they don't look bad, but they feel a little bit bad. These are not my favourite accessories by any means. If we go and buy a point system here, then that's one to Windblade. However, the posing on these guys are exactly the same, so forgive me if I just cover Slipstream because she's more topical and I can put that in the shorts. The head is on a kinda limited ball joint. It's really good and mobile, but the collar piece clashes with the chin, so the mold can't really look sideways, without looking up to accomplish it at least. You can move the wings up and down and they can flap back and forth a little, which is a little bit weird on Windblade. Kinda likes to spring forwards. The arms can move out pretty standardly and they can go back and forth pretty well before they clash with the wings. There's bicep swivels, pretty lackluster elbows, wrist swivels, a waist swivel. Their hips can move out really far and can go forward and back really well, really tightly on Slipstream. There's some slightly limited thigh swivels thanks to the cut, standard knees, and some decent ankle pivots. The posing on these figures is pretty average, if not a little below average, which is a shame. You know, most of the body is pretty good, but the head lets it down a little bit. And across the board, the tolerances on them are pretty good, but I would say I prefer the way that Windblade feels. Slipstream is a little bit too tight in some places, but then you've got that weird little issue with Windblade's wings. They're pretty evenly matched here, but they're still not the most fun things in the world to pose, unless you put them on a stand, at which point you have a blast, trust me. The transformation on this mold is really, really good, actually. At least in my books, I have a lot of fun with this. There's a couple of things that you kind of need to learn by trial and error, like how much force to apply and where to apply it to untap the legs, figuring out the alignment of the arms since they do just kind of sit there, and then how the backpack comes and encompasses the head. But there's a lot of things that I really like. I like the way that the legs kind of fold up, it's very satisfying. I like the way that the cockpit expands out like that, and it leaves you with a jet mode that I actually absolutely love. This is my favorite deluxe class jet mode that I own, particularly with Slipstream, but we'll get to the colors in a minute, because first I just want to take a moment to gush about how much I like this sculpt. The shins at the back end of the jet mode look really, really good, just as the back of a plane. The taper of them, the way that the tail fins all sit, that kind of exhaust vent looking thing you get from the shin details. And then you get to the wings and the body, and it's just covered in really smooth surfaces and all of these little rivet details. I love it. The angle of the wings too. And then the cockpit looks amazing, at least in my books. I love the way that it slims down so much and comes to a point. I love the actual molded cockpit and the seats that you can see in there. As far as I know, it doesn't open up. You do get a front landing gear underneath that flips out, which you can pair with the bottom landing gear to sit it down nicely. You get a whole bunch of 5mm ports under the wings so you can plug in Slipstream's null rays. The flight stand port underneath perfectly fits Windblade's sword, which is really nice for some storage. And then the way that each of these molds wear the colours is just absolutely superb. The blue almost entirely disappears on Windblade, the black slims down a lot, and you just get these little bits of trim on the nose cone and the wings. I absolutely love that. It looks really clean and consistent. Love the way that the rotors can flip around so you get the gunmetal on top, and just the overall consistency works really well. But once again, I have to say that Slipstream is my preferred color scheme for this because this thing looks so mean. The dark purple and silver nose cone that leads into the purple plain body, and the blue on the rear end of the wingtips, the way it looks with the null rays on there. I love the shade of transparent blue that they used on the cockpit. Windblade looked cool because she was sleek and consistent. This looks cool because it wants to kill you. At least that's the vibe I get. Somehow this plane mode just looks fucking evil, and I love it. And overall, I do really like both of these figures, particularly Slipstream. She just does it a little bit more for me thanks to the colours. And as far as deluxes go, these are far from the worst that I've ever received, although I do think they're some of the weaker ones that I've gotten from Legacy United. Like I say, by no means are they bad, but they're a little bit underwhelming in robot mode. I love the alt modes, don't get me wrong, but the posing, Windblade's head, a little bit of the QC, I feel like that could have used an extra moment in the oven. I would probably recommend these, but maybe not for full price. Windblade I got for 15 quid, and that was an absolute steal. I feel more than justified for that. But 24 does feel like pushing it a bit for Slipstream. I feel like this one's going to be up to you in terms of how much you like deluxes, and how much you're willing to fork out for them. But some other figures that I've gotten this year, Gears, Bumblebee, G1 Prime, they justify themselves a little better in my books. And if you agree, drop us a like. The channel needs it, it'll help. Maybe do us a solid and drop us a comment on which of these you prefer. Which one wears them all better. And be sure to subscribe, because if everything is on schedule, and the figure that I'm talking about in the video arrives on time, then next week will be the biggest collaboration that I've ever hosted. My thanks to all of you for 2.5k. Unless UK distribution happens again, at which point I'll start chewing off my feet. Oh good god, the pre-order's already been moved twice. Come on Hasbro, throw us a bone.